Today's goal for us is to help you identify and avoid some of the major mistakes people make in trying to rekindle their marriage. We want to discover recent research that can revolutionize the way that you see your relationship. Learn a simple tool that can change your communication in 90 seconds and give you the resources to help your relationship to grow. So I created this process called Learn, Live, Love. And I say that it's the process for couples to be able to not only fall in love, but to stay in love and grow in love, and to continue to fall in love over and over, because really that's what should be happening in a relationship. You should be reacquainting yourselves over and over with each other. So the process I created was a Learn, Live, Love process. Right now, that's not the subject of here, but I can go over that in another time with you guys. This is me and my lovely wife and my daughter, the reason I do this. But in reality, relationships are not about pretty pictures and nice videos. And we all know that. And we all know that we can all have these great Facebook pictures and all these things in our profiles and all that stuff. But in reality, this is not just all of a relationship. This is the nice time of a relationship. And we all have difficult times that we run into. We all have fights that we go through. There's certain things that help us go through those fights and help us be able to repair during those fights. And we're going to go over that here today. This is a process that I say that it's what I do in relationships, because for most people, when they go to either a relationship therapist or somewhere where, or a counselor and things like that, what usually happens is, and I'm going to be drawing on here, let's say this is Pain Island, and this is over here, and that's where you're in despair, frustration, unhappiness. And this is Pleasure Island over here on the other side. That's when you can have fun, love, and passion with your partner. And a lot of times what happens is that the therapist will be over here. And whenever their clients have trouble, they go over here and help the client, and then they go back to their island. And then when the client needs more help, they go over here and they help the client, and then they come back here to Pleasure Island. The issue with this is that every time that this couple needs help, that therapist needs to go over and help them and then come back. Sometimes the issue is that that help can't happen at the time that the couple needs it. So they live in a lot of misery. So what I do is a little slightly different. What I'm doing is I'm going from here in Pleasure Island. I'm going over here and going like, hey, look, we have some techniques and some skills that we can teach you. There's a place over here called Pleasure Island. And if you follow the techniques and the skills that we can teach you, you can also live in Pleasure Island. So what I do is I tell them we have 3 different stations that we have to stop in, and each one of them has a skill that you need to learn, or 4 skills that you need to learn. But in the end, you end up being able to help your relationship by being able to have a process of processing emotions that, if they're not processed, can become resentments in your relationship. And by creating habits that will build your relationship on a daily basis with trust, respect, with affection and understanding. So these are the things this is the method that I really go under. It's bringing the people, teaching them the skills instead of going in there and trying to solve their problems for them. So what we'll cover today, so there's a lot more than this. This is actually a shortened version of a bigger presentation that I do. These are 4 mistakes that we use for today. Mistake number 1 is assuming that communication is your main problem in your relationship. Mistake number two, it's asking the wrong questions. Mistake number 3 is ignoring the slow fade that happens within a relationship. And mistake number 4 is a harsh startup. There's much more. If we can actually go over it, we're going to go over certain things. But the last thing that I'm going to teach you is this harsh startup technique, or actually the soft startup technique, because it counteracts this harsh startup. And so let's go into mistake number 1, assuming communication is your problem. most people, when you ask them what makes a great marriage, they say good communication and being able to compromise. A lot of times, and these might be relationships that have been together for 30, 40, 50 years. And maybe that are wedding, and somebody says, who's been married the longest? And what is your secret? Oh, well, we communicate and we have great compromise. Or another one is happy wife, happy life. And they have these assumptions because they really can't go back and figure out what really made their marriage work. Most people don't really think about what it is that makes their marriage work. It just works. And for about 20% of the population, that is naturally true. Their relationship just works. And it might be because of how they're paired. There's certain things that we look at when we're looking at relationships to make sure that we can help them. And one of them is these attachment styles. And I'm not going to go into attachment styles in this particular lecture, but a quick overview of what it is that we can't survive on our own, especially when we're children, and especially when we're infants. We need some type of outside help. And the way that we ask for that help is through being able to present our communication, whether that's crying, smiling, cooing, making noise, flailing our legs, anything that we can do to get the attention of our caregiver at that moment or at that time. Usually the caregiver might be your mother or your father. And over the first few years of your life, you're learning patterns of how to be able to get that connection with that important person in your life. And so there's 3 ways that you can get that connection. One of the ways that you can get is through what we call a secure connection. And a secure connection is you've been nurtured. Anytime that you cry, or most of the time that you cry or ask for attention, there's somebody there to take care of you and actually give you comfort and help you learn how to soothe yourself in the long run. There's 2 other attachments, which is what happens in most of reality, which one of them is called an avoidant attachment, and one of them is called a anxious attachment. And in the anxious attachment, what might be happening when you're a child is that at times when you try to connect with your loved one, they're there for you, but at other times they're pushing you away. So to you, it kind of seems like, okay, in order to connect, this connection thing, the way that it works is sometimes they're there, sometimes they're not there for me. Now, another type of attachment style that I just mentioned was avoidant. And an avoidant style, and these can happen for many reasons. For example, an avoidant style can happen because the mom had postpartum depression, and it's not something that she can really help. It's not something that she has control over. So it's not about placing blame. It's just natural things that happen, and we should try to understand how those connections happen because they do affect how we behave with our relationships in our futures. And so the avoidant style might be something that the mom, let's say she has postpartum depression. And in that postpartum depression state, she can't give the attention that the child needs when the child needs it. So if the child cries, they kind of push them away, and they feel that sense of push away. So that child throughout their childhood can learn that if they want to attach to somebody, the way that it works is that you really can't trust people. You have to trust in yourself. You have to be self-reliant. And so now these will project into the future of your relationship years later, 20, 30 years later, when you're attaching to your partner, when you're attaching to the person that you feel the closest to, you are playing out these records that you created when you were very little, or these patterns that you created when you were very little. And unfortunately, most of us are not aware of that. I think one of the reasons studying all these things, I think one of the reasons why my marriage worked so well was because I had more of an anxious attachment and my wife had more of a secure attachment. And her having that secure attachment created more of a security for me within the relationship, that I was able to grow in the relationship and be able to attach to her better and not have that anxious attachment that I had with other loved ones in my life. So these are things that we look at when we're looking at communication. So if poor communication is not the problem, then what is the problem? Well, let me go back to how I got started in relationships and how I started this whole journey and became basically a student of relationships. And I don't like to call myself an expert or somebody that, is all knowledgeable in relationships, because there's no such thing. I'm more of a student in a relationship. I'm maybe a little bit ahead of most of my clients, hopefully, that I can teach them how to get there. But really what my role is to really teach them how to move forward within the relationships based on the dynamics that are going on. I have a particular gift, and it's not something that I knew all my life, although I've known as I've had relationships throughout my life. My relationships have been pretty close with a lot of people. One of the things is that I'm able to kind of empathize with people. I'm able to be very, I can translate what people are kind of feeling. And so when I deal with couples, I can be a translator, which is a really important part of the communication within a relationship. But this is the thing, they're not here all the time. And so I can't be with them translating what's going on all the time. So I need to teach them what are the dynamics that are going on for that couple to be able to communicate when they're not here. What are the things that they need to do? And what are the things that they're going to run into that emotionally they might feel like it's really catastrophic, because whether they have that anxious attachment or that avoided attachment, they might seem catastrophic, but it's not as catastrophic as they're making it think. It's kind of like, it's in essence, it's part of your cognition, your thought process. And we'll talk about that in a minute as well. But when I first started as in this relationship, so about 5 years ago, I decided to become a coach. And the reason I decided to become a coach is because in my office, I was doing health coaching. And there's 3 things that cause the lesions that chiropractors look at. So by trade, I'm a chiropractor. I'm a doctor of chiropractic, and that I still have that business, and that business does very well. And I love it. I love taking care of clients physically, being able to restore a lot of the function in their nervous system so that their bodies can just function better. But there's 3 things that cause these lesions that we actually look for as chiropractors. And well, there's one thing that causes it. We can divide it into 3 things. What causes it is stress. We can divide that stress into 3 different types of stress: physical, chemical, and emotional stress or mental stress. In the office, I deal with physical stress. Physical stresses could be all the way from bad posture to poor exercise to even proper exercise is a stress to your body. So I dealt with that with chiropractic and the adjustments. The second stress is chemical stress. That could be all the way from the air that you breathe to the water that you drink to the food that. And so the way that we dealt with that in the office is we had brought in a nutritional evaluation that we could look at your blood work, and we could tell as a complete set of blood work with a metabolic panel, a CBC, and thyroid panel, a liver panel, and all those things. We were able to see how your body is processing certain things and what nutrients it might need to be able to function better. So now the third thing that I had brought, and this I started bringing in to expand practice about 5 years ago, was coaching. I wanted to deal with the mental status in people. And so I decided to coach under the people that I thought was one of the best coaches on the planet, which is Tony Robbins. I really truly believe that he was the one that brought the concept of life coaching into being, and the impact that he's had and how he's able to help people change is incredible to me. So I started looking, and I found his school of coaching, and I chose going into that arena of coaching. Now, I had finished coaching. I had also done an advanced coaching program, and I became board certified through the education department here in New York State. And at that point, I started thinking, okay, so what would I like to make a niche? I already have this advanced relationship training. And another area of my life, it was more of a selfish thing to do. It was a little selfish of why I wanted to do relationships. And it's because my relationship was really important to me. And I had a passionate relationship, but we are high school sweethearts. We've been together for 27 years. Well, we've been together for 31 years. We've been married for 27 years this year. And as high school sweethearts, we didn't know anything. We weren't mature. We didn't know ourselves. We were just growing up. We didn't even know how to be financially savvy. We didn't know any of these things. And so we had to learn to do it together. And that was an important part, because when we actually look back now, knowing all the things that we know, I discovered a lot of the reasons why we worked so well. Number one, she had a secure attachment. Number two, we kept ourselves as a focus. Even when we were going through school, even when we had our daughter, actually there was a point in school where I realized that it was that keeping the focus on each other was very important. And it was when we would go to classes together, we would come back home together, we would study together, we would go out together. And there came a point where we kind of started ignoring each other, even though we were physically in the same room, we weren't really paying attention to each other. And I noticed that our relationship started dwindling at that point. But immediately we kind of realized that we were in the same space together, but we weren't actually connecting. And so we changed that. And we actually kept that change throughout our life. Even when we had our daughter, we've continued to keep change. Of connecting and having that focus on each other. And I think that was a big part of what created our relationship. So I decided to start doing research into why relationships work and what makes relationships fail. And so I started asking the question, and I started looking at the research that was out there, and two names kept on coming up: Susan Johnson and John Gottman. So I started doing a lot of research around them, and I started discovering that they were actually the best therapy out there. And I'll go over a little bit of that in a little bit. But one of the things that I learned from Gottman was that communication is not the main problem. And the reason the way that I discovered that was he had done research where he could predict by 95% accuracy if a relationship was going to succeed or fail within 10 minutes of watching a fight with a couple. And that was actually, the divorce was going to be within 7 years, not the general 50% in 50 years or 40 years that we have. It was actually 95% over the next 7 years that couple was going to fail. And so Malcolm Gladwell put him in his book Blink, and he got this notoriety with tongue twister with different networks and everything like that. And he started doing a lot more research. But what happened was that he said, well, that's old news. The fact that I can predict divorce by 95% is old news right now, because we actually tried to correct those things that I was observing, and most of them were our communication. And it's like he does, because most marital traditional therapy is based on fixing your communication issues. That's what they focus on. And so he tried doing that, but it helped temporarily. It didn't help permanently, and it didn't help the couple grow. So what would happen is that they would teach them these communication skills, whether it was active listening or avoiding the four horsemen. And what would happen is these couples would seem like they're doing well, but the assumption is that if the couple can fix their problem and they can do more problem solving by communicating better, that then all the other pieces will start falling back in place, and they'll have more peace in the relationship, and they'll be happier in the relationship. Unfortunately, what Gottman was finding is that these things weren't helping and weren't fixing the relationships. So he had to go back to the drawing table. He had to go back to his data and find out what the data was saying about these couples that were staying together. And what they found out that, and I know that it sounds crazy, obviously that's what the slide says, that we're used to hearing about communication being the key to a happy relationship. While it's important, it's really a symptom, not the root of the problem. The reason we believe that communication is the key to a happy relationship, because it's the most obvious presentation of the couple. When a couple comes in, they're usually fighting about something. They usually have some type of issue, whether it's a financial issue, whether it's kids, whether it's not getting along in some way. But the problem is that it can be many things in that relationship that is causing this problem. But when we tried to improve those things, the communication didn't improve. So you had to improve the foundation. So what is that foundation? What is the reason why people have fights? And Gottman was asked that question one time, and he said, no reason. They just have fights because they have fights. It could be over the remote control. It could be over dinner. It could be over something with the kids. People just have fights. And it's not a sign of an unhealthy relationship. It can be a sign of a very healthy relationship. It's the way that they deal and they're able to process and repair what the discussion they're having in that fight or that argument that makes the difference. So what's the solution? The solution is to really focus on the actual problem. So when I'm teaching a couple, what we want to do is we want to strengthen the friendship, because the friendship, we found that is what helps the couple to repair and process their issues later on. If you're having issues in your relationship, one of the things that you feel is you feel this distance. You feel this wall, emotional wall. You feel this kind of like repelling of both of you when you're talking. That is the friendship. That's not part of communication. The feeling that you're feeling is because your friendship is being pushed away. It's that attachment, that emotional bond is being kind of taken apart. And when that happens, you go back to your childhood. We go back to the attachment styles of either avoidant, and anxious, or secure. And we start dealing with the issue in our present moment with our skills that we developed when we were infants and children. And we start behaving in the same way. We have temper tantrums. We push people away. We have these negative feelings of, well, I don't know how to work with this. I don't know how to deal with this. We have these ways of being able to dismiss emotions and not be able, and it could be in a nice way, but we have this way of dismissing our partner's emotions or dismissing our own emotions because we just are not used to feeling it, because that's not what we learned how to do when we were children. And this is not therapy in which we go back to your childhood and we talk about what your mom did and all those things, or your and all that. No, we actually deal with this in the present moment. What's going on in your relationship? Okay, so we can see the dynamics of what's going on. How can we help you change that? And so that's part of some of the deeper things that we do. But in this sense, the important part for you is to focus on the right things. There's an incredible book out there that's great. It has a great message. It has a great framework, and it's actually, it is the #1 book, and it's been the #1 book in relationships sold for probably the past decade. And it's called The Love Languages, the 5 Love Languages, written by Dr. Gary Chapman. And although it's a great framework, it does not really help. And research actually shows it. In 2017, they did research with the principles of the book, and they said that it helps, but it only helps with couples that can actually self-soothe or self-emotionally regulate, which means that it only works with couples that are doing well. Because those couples that are having issues can't self-regulate and don't have the emotional connection to be able to fix the issue without it blowing up. So just giving them that communication skill is not going to help them. So if you have a great relationship, it might enhance your relationship, which is good, because now you learn about your partner and now you're more focused on your partner. But that's just a small part of what needs to happen for the relationship to be built. So you want to focus on the actual problem, which is what's going on in the friendship. Why have we become distant? What can we do to become closer to our partner? And that takes us to the next mistake. So the next mistake is mistake #2, asking the wrong questions. The questions you choose to ask can determine the ultimate outcome of your relationship. And what do I mean by that? Well, I learned a long time ago, not just from Tony and not just from, actually, there's a book called Thinking Like Einstein. And the author actually gives pretty convincing thought about Einstein and being able to do the things that he did if he wasn't asking the right questions. Because at the time, people were asking all types of questions about science and reality and how reality, and what they were seeing is, well, why doesn't reality follow what we already have determined? And Einstein didn't ask that question. Einstein asked the question of, okay, so this is reality. This is what I'm observing. How does it fit together? And so in a relationship, we can ask the wrong questions. Marcus Bird was one of my coaches, and he's from Australia. He's a wellness coach, and he created this concept saying the art of the ask, which meant that the quality of the answer is based on the quality of the question that you're asking. So it sounds simplistic, but it's another mistake people make when trying to improve their relationship. The quality of the question will determine the quality of the answer. If you ask questions like, why am I unhappy? Why can't we get along? Why can't I get the relationship I want? Or say things like, but how can anything work? We're just too different. You're asking the wrong questions, because the answers that you're going to get are bad answers. Why am I unhappy? Well, because your partner is being mean. So if you ask the wrong questions, you're not going to get the right answers. So ask the right questions. What was happening during these times that we enjoyed each other? What kind of things that you do in the past where you found joy in your partner? Are there any other things that you can do or incorporate into your lives today that can make it better? How can we enjoy our time together now? Those are better questions to ask when you're trying to change things in your relationship. And one of the biggest things that people go about is like, they say, well, how can we communicate better? Well, that's an okay question. It's not a really bad question, but you can ask, well, why isn't it that we're repairing so well? That's a better question. It's the difference between so take a second now just to feel this internally. Think of a problem that you're having right now, and it could be a problem in your relationship. And now that you have that problem thought out, right? There's this problem that's in your relationship. Now, instead of thinking of it as a problem, think of it as a challenge. And my question to you, and I can't see you guys, but my question to you is, did that change the feeling internally for you? Because for most people, what that does is it changes it from being a victim to now being more empowered and being able to take charge of it. Now, let's go a step further. Instead of thinking of it as a challenge, can you think of it as an opportunity? So now that puts it in a different light. Now you start creating this thing that originally was a problem. You elevate it to a challenge, and now you're finding the opportunities in this whole situation. It's a different way of thinking. It's a different perspective, and that's what questions allow you to do. And if you ask the right questions, you get great answers. So that was principle number 2, or the mistake number 2. Mistake number 3 is ignoring the slow fade that happens in all relationships. And this is where science is finding that the slow decline and eventual cheating can happen, or just betrayal, which doesn't have to be a emotional or physical betrayal with somebody else, but just within the relationship itself. So when you ignore the way that relationships usually happen is you have this stage called the honeymoon stage. And in the honeymoon stage, it's really hormonally based. It's based on attraction. You have oxytocin, dopamine, you have epinephrine, you have all these cortisol, all these hormones playing into the whole situation where you can't see anything. Love, in essence, becomes blind because everything is so new. Your certainty is up, your variety and adventure is up, your significance is up, your connection is up, your growth is up. And these are all human needs. These are our psychological human needs that we are actually looking for on a daily basis to fulfill. And they actually determine most of our actions in our day, whether we're looking for certainty, variety or adventure, significance, love and connection, growth, and contribution. And in a new relationship, we're getting all of those. We're getting the significance that we want. We're getting the connection that we want. We're getting all this different variety. And so these things play a big role in how you view that relationship and how the hormones get set up in your relationship. But after about 6 months to sometimes even 2 years, you start going into the reality stage in your relationship. And that's when you start taking those rose-colored glasses or those love-colored glasses that you have, and you start seeing your partner, you start seeing different little things about your partner. And unless you're able to keep a little bit of that positive illusion about your partner, and it's not fooling yourself, it's just being able to focus on the right things. And we'll go over a little bit that in the thought process, but it's going over the positive things. And that's part of what we do when we build a friendship. We want them to build fondness and admiration. So I have here, don't be the frog. And it's that proverbial frog that you can put in a pot, and if you slowly increase the heat as the frog stays there and gets used to the heat increase, it'll actually boil. But if you were to take that same frog and throw it into the pot, it would immediately jump out because it wasn't that slow process. It wasn't that getting used to. And in a relationship, what happens is that we see things that happen in our life. We have this great time while we're dating, we get married, all these things, everything is going great. We might have some falls, we might have some fights that we have and all that stuff. But at the same time, life starts taking over. Career, children, time with, and children is a huge one. About within the first 3 years of a relationship, of a child being put into a relationship or child being born within the relationship, the relationship satisfaction decreases about 67%. So it's kind of like throwing a grenade into your relationship. And if you don't know the things to do to be able to counteract that, it can cause a lot of problems. And people wait about 6.5 years before they do anything. So that's where you see the 7, 8, 9, 10-year mark in a relationship. So we start letting familiarity, we start letting complacency and assumptions just take over our relationships. And we start changing our thoughts. And we start using cognitive distortions, which we all use. Cognitive distortions can be used all the way to create, you end up creating, with these cognitive distortions, you end up creating either depression, anxiety, you end up creating all these different things, but it also can change your relationship. And how do I know that it is cognitive change? Because when they did the research, one of the things that Gottman noticed in that 10-minute fight, in that 10-minute argument, was how the couples related to each other as far as it related to bad memories or memories of the past. They might have had a great relationship at the beginning, but what happens is that they're now in the present and they're seeing all these problems. So now they're going back in their mind and they're revising history of what happened. And they're saying to themselves, oh, I should have known that. I should have known how bad this was. I should have guessed how he was. I should have guessed how she was. And they start creating all these bad memories. And that's basically you rewriting the structure of your cognitive structure. The thoughts that you have about your partner, you're changing and you're distorting. You're using either blame or personalization, you're labeling them. You're using emotional reasoning, which is when you're in a certain emotional state. Let's say you're saying, well, I'm upset, or I feel like an idiot when I'm around him, so I must be an idiot, or labeling them. So when you label them as well, that's a cognitive distortion. But emotional reason, all or nothing thinking, which is usually generalities. When you say all or none, or those things, those are cognitive distortions that you're creating. Should statements are cognitive distortions that you're creating. And so what I mean by cognitive distortion is that you have these structures that you create in your mind based on your thoughts, and your thoughts most of the time will influence your emotions. Sometimes your emotions will influence your thoughts, but usually it's your thoughts will create an emotion. And that emotion then starts creating other thoughts, which put you into a situation where you can either start creating all or nothing ideas of, he's always like that, or she's always like that. This is never going to be right. Those are all things that they're really wrong structures. They're fake structures. They're structures that don't hold water and are not logical, but our brain doesn't really recognize that because it's our brain. We created the structure, so we believe it's right. It's our brain talking to us, and we're saying, oh, okay, we've rationalized this, we've reasoned all of it, we've processed all the logic. But if you start breaking it down and start realizing how you're using these distortions, you start realizing, okay, that's not right. I need to change that. I need to change the all or nothing thinking about my partner. I need to change the labeling of my partner. I need to stop blaming my partner and start creating thought process that will support your goal, your ultimate goal within your relationship. And then we have another thing in that thought process, and ignoring the slow fade, is this common attribution error. The common attribution error is, so in its basically like you're going to a therapist, and the therapist, and you're looking at the therapist and you're going to yourself like, well, you know what? I have some issues, but really it's my partner. You're using a cognitive distortion to blame your partner. It's my partner that really needs to change. I know I have a little bit to do, but it's really my partner. And if they change, then everything will be okay. And both partners are thinking the same thing. It's a common thing. It's one of the most common issues that therapists have when dealing with their clients. And as a cognitive distortion, when you're in it, you don't recognize that you're in it. And usually it happens as a slow process where you slowly start changing that process. It might be a time where they lost your trust, a time where they lost your respect, just slight, a time where, and at that point, you start making negative alternative comparisons. So how does that look? Okay, so you have a fight with your partner, and now you go to work, and there's somebody there, maybe they're the opposite sex, and they start listening to you. And now you feel like this connection because they're listening to you. And now you're going like, oh, this feels really good. I wish I had this with my partner. And now you go back, but when you go back to your partner, you don't want to stir anything up. So you're not going to tell them how good you felt when you were talking to this person. But now things don't get any better with your partner. So you start comparing more and more of your relationship with other relationships. And you start wishing that you were in another relationship or that you had another partner. And then that starts that slow fade of your mind where you start going into that betrayal. And that's how the research is showing how betrayal usually happens. It's not a serial cheater that is just immoral and that once a cheater, always a cheater. No, most cheating happens because of that slow fade into that negative alternative comparisons. So, so now mistake number 4 that people do when they are trying to rekindle their relationship, and this is a big one. And this is one of the tips that I want to teach you to change your communication in 90 seconds. And so one of the things that happens in our startup, or when people are want to voice what's going on or want to voice their complaint or their annoyance, is that usually people wait and wait and wait until it gets to a point where they're like, I don't want to deal with this anymore. Or let's say it's a situation where the husband has a tendency of, when he comes home from work, taking off his clothes and leaving it on the ground. And the wife also works, and she comes home, but she also does a lot of the housework, which happens a lot. So now she comes home, and the clothes is on the floor, and she's actually asked them over and over to please not leave the clothes on the floor and to pick up that clothes and put it in the laundry, because it just creates more work for her and it's insensitive. And so the husband, maybe he's been doing a good job for a while, but the wife comes home and she's stressed. And that day he left the clothes on the floor. And so now the wife goes like, I've told you before, you should pick up. Why are you such a slob? I come home from work and the clothes is on the floor. And the husband, and she goes, you always do this. So what is going to be the husband's reaction? Well, it's going to be a defensive reaction, because anytime that you're being attacked, what you're going to do is you're going to defend yourself. So his natural reaction is to say like, I don't always do it. I've been actually doing really well. Why are you actually yelling at me right now? And starts getting into a bigger escalating fight. It could have been corrected and fixed, and it could have been processed a lot easier by using what's called a soft startup. And during a soft startup, what you're doing is you're making sure that your approach is a non-defensive approach. Like they can't take a defensive stance. And in some of the literature, it's called nonviolent communication. And so what you're going to do is you're going to figure out a way that you don't rise or you don't increase their ability to be defensive. And it's a very simple situation. Before you start your conversation, even if you're mad, even if you're boiling, you might have really good reasons why you're mad. But if you voice it in a way where the other person needs to feel defensive, you're going to end up the fight in the same way that you started, because the research shows that 96% of the time, the way that a fight is started, it's the way that it ends. So if you start it in a negative tone, it's going to end up in a negative tone. If you start it in a positive tone, it can end up in a positive tone. So the way that you do it is very simple. I feel about a specific situation, and I would like to see this specific action take place. So let me give you an example. And I like to use an example that I do with my daughter. And a simple example of one of the first times that I used it with my daughter was she was probably about 14 or 15. She's 18 now. She was 14 or 15. And we had told her, it was a situation where we told her to put her clothes away. They were in the hallway, they were on the floor, and we had told her several times. So I was actually studying this, and I started thinking, you know what? How do I approach her so that she doesn't become defensive? How do I make it so that she doesn't have any way of just coming back at me and us escalating this, and then her ending up grounded, and me end up upset, and all of us having an upheaval. So I started saying, okay, so I feel, so what is it that I feel personally? Not how I feel about them or how they're making me feel or what they're doing to make me feel that way. It's what do I feel? So I went up to her and I said, you know, I feel disrespected. I'm feeling ignored, and I'm feeling really angry. I didn't say why. I didn't accuse her. And I said, because the clothes are still on the ground. So it was about the situation, not about the past. I didn't bring up anything about the past. I didn't say, because you continuously leave your clothes, because we always tell you to put it away, because we've told you 3 times already. Nope. It's because the clothes is still there. And what I would like to see is for it to be put in the laundry. And so at that point, she really doesn't have a way of being defensive, because she could have said, if I would have said it any other way, she could have said, well, I was doing something important. I was doing this. I was doing that. I was doing my homework, anything that she could have become defensive. But at that point, she understood how I felt. She understood why I felt that way. And she understood what I wanted to happen. I wasn't pushing her. I wasn't trying to coerce her to do it. I wasn't trying to do any of those things. I was just stating how I'm feeling about that particular situation and what I would like to happen. And so this conversation, so it's actually helped me incredibly with my daughter, and it's helped me with my wife as well. And it's helped us be able to start the conversation in the right way instead of starting the conversation upset or starting the conversation with sarcasm, which sometimes parents think it's great because we think, that way we add some humor and we can get over it. But it's not conducive to the proper goal that we want. So this harsh startup and the soft startup, that's a great technique. And it only takes you 90 seconds to go back in your head and just think before you speak. And you can complain. It's not that it's all positive, it's negative, but it's done in a way where the partner doesn't feel like they need to become defensive, because if they do, then you're going to go through that pattern: criticism, sarcasm, defensiveness, then comes contempt, and then comes stonewalling. And that's a pattern that we see in relationships that are failing. And I have that in another class if you want to hear about that. But those are called the 4 horsemen, and Gottman discovered those in the research. So, so there's other mistakes here. One of them is expecting instant change, quitting too soon, refusing to grow up is another mistake, choosing the wrong type of help. And that's an important one. So I'll go over that. That'll be the last one we go over. We were only supposed to do 4, but I'll do some of these. Not choosing the wrong type of help. Not all therapy, and specifically not all marriage therapy, is the same. I've had clients that they come in and tell me, well, you know what? We went to the therapist and the therapist brought up these issues, and now the 50 minutes were up, and now we got to leave the office, and we're having all these fights. And it actually happened to me with some clients. Originally, when I started doing this, I had some of the same process that most therapists have. So the couple comes in, we start working with them. I have patients that I have to see right after them. So we spent like an hour and 15 minutes together. They actually were leaving. One of the people, the wife in the couple, calls me and says, "Oh, we got into a fight. We stopped at the light on our way home. He got out of the car and he's walking out of the car." And I'm like, okay, so how am I supposed to help? He's walking, and I'm over here in my house. I can't reach him by phone. So I start trying to call him to actually talk to him. But that wasn't the issue. The issue is that this happens many times in therapists' offices. And the reason is because we're not giving them the tools that they can take home and then use this to fully process the situation. So what I do now is totally different. I actually help them learn the process so that, and in the office, basically what we're teaching them is the skills so that they can take this and use it home. And if they have any issues, then they come back and I talk to them and we walk them through it again. And we practice their skills several different times. But therapy that focuses on the true problem is the best therapy. And those are usually therapies that are based on Gottman or EFT, which is emotionally focused therapy. Those are the best therapies that are around. Traditional marital therapy, and these are not my numbers, these are the research numbers, only is effective in about 30 to 50% of relationships. That means that 50 to 70% of relationships that are going to traditional marital therapy are going to end up in failure. And that's pretty sad, because right now we have therapy that is more than 70% effective. And actually, Susan Johnson with EFT won awards from our government for the effectiveness of her work with couples. And that was what was based on that whole attachment base. Now, with Gottman, his workshop alone works 50% better than traditional marital therapy. That's great for 2 reasons. Number one, you don't end up having to go to expensive therapy sessions and bringing up all your problems and not actually dealing with the actual underlying issue that's creating the whole thing. And number 2, in the workshop, most men don't like going into a therapist's office. So this allows them to be able to learn from a point of view that it's a marriage enhancement class. They're learning about what makes relationship work. And they're learning the skills, not from the point of view where they're having fights and all these discussions. No, we start with teaching them the skills that will start uniting them as friends again. We teach love maps. We teach how to fondness and admiration. We teach how to turn towards each other. So we're teaching all these different skills first. And then on top of that, we start adding those conflict management skills. How to use active listening. When is active listening useful in a relationship? So when you go out there to get the right type of help, find what it's not just somebody that fits with you. It's not somebody that you just can get along with. It's somebody that knows what the underlying issues are in a relationship and can actually help you fix those. So, resources to rekindle your marriage. I wanted to give you a couple resources. One of them is the 7 Principles for Making Marriage Work book. That's by Gottman. The book alone is an incredible help for relationships. They actually, when they did the research for the workshop, the control group was just reading the book and they got incredible results just with the book. In essence, they actually weren't able to use the control group as a control group anymore because they did so well just by reading the book. So if you read the book and apply the principles, that's great. Now, there is a workshop based on the book, which I do. And it's one of the things that convinced me about Gottman's work, because I had a couple that was having difficulty in their relationship, like on the verge of divorce. And within 3 weeks of being in the workshop, they totally changed their relationship around. Within 8 weeks, once the workshop was over, they were actually relating to each other they had issues for quite some time, and they were going to a marriage therapy for at least a year before they took the class. And now they're actually taking the exercises to their therapist to do at the therapist's office. So the other thing is Relationship Evolution on Facebook, Relationship Evolution News, which is actually just our newsletter that keeps you up to date on all the activities that we have, all the workshops that we'll have, all these classes like this. I try to make different subjects for each class so that people that want to participate are not seeing the same thing over and over. And also check out drmrelationship.com. That's where and you can schedule a call if you want to speak to me about your relationship. And if you're interested in the workshop, we can talk about the workshop and I can give you some more information about that. So the next steps for you are to experiment, have fun, keep the goal in mind, get the right kind of help. And by what I mean by experiment is that just try different things in your relationship. Ask some questions about what's going on in your relationship in a way in which it makes you empowered. And then try it out. It's really an experiment. If it doesn't work, change it. Try it out for 30 days. If that particular communication skill that you learn, let's say it's the soft startup, which is a communication skill. It's a communication management skill. So it's only temporary if you don't fix the foundation. But try it out. Experiment to see how it works for you. Try different ways of doing it. Develop the skill of being able to do it. Don't just do it once or twice. If you find yourself being frustrated with your partner and you're going to start a discussion, sit back for 90 seconds. Actually write it out. I feel about this specific situation, and this is what I would like to see. And try it. If it doesn't work, go back to the drawing table. Maybe you're doing it wrong. And most likely you probably are, because I've seen it work in many, many, many different marriages. So, and keep the goal in mind. What is your goal? Is your goal to fight with your partner, or is your goal to be able to connect to your partner and have them understand what you're trying to communicate to them so that it can actually change? And get the right help. Like I said, the average couple waits 6.5 years before they find any help. And by then there's a lot of damage done in the relationship. So some final thoughts. There's always hope to grow your relationship as long as you have some strength on the foundation of the relationship. It's hard work, but it's not supposed to be unpleasant work. If it's unpleasant, you're doing something wrong. And of course, it's not going to be sustainable. That's living in misery. And it's hard work, but it's enjoyable work. So if you're finding that it's being difficult, then find help. find the right help. And that's it, guys. Thank you for participating. I will. So today I'm talking about rekindling your marriage and avoid the common mistakes that lead to marriage disasters. And